This was never a war the United States was fully prepared for. Because this isn't Iraq, it isn't Libya, it isn't Venezuela. The United States, the most powerful military in the world. And yet, this is not a war you can win with military power alone. The battlefield is not where most people are looking. When I look at this conflict, and I do think we are misunderstanding it, because on the surface, it looks simple, a superpower against a smaller nation. But in reality, this is something very different. This is not just a military confrontation. It's a war of attrition, a slow, calculated, long-term strategy. And Iran has been preparing for this kind of conflict for decades, not just with weapons, but with strategy, with networks, with patience, over the years, through groups like Hezbollah, the Houthis, regional militias. Iran has built something different, not a traditional army, but a distributed network, one that can operate across multiple regions at the same time. And instead of confronting the United States directly, the focus is somewhere else entirely, not the battlefield, but the system that supports it, energy, trade routes, critical infrastructure. Because nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through one narrow point, the Strait of Hormuz. And when that choke point becomes unstable, the impact is immediate. Global markets react, energy prices rise, supply chains begin to strain. But it doesn't stop there. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, depend heavily on stability in that region. Up to 90% of food imports for parts of the Gulf move through these same routes. And even more critically, water. Many of these countries rely on desalination plants for a large portion of their drinking water. In some cases, more than half of the population depends on it, which raises a difficult question. What happens if critical infrastructure like this becomes vulnerable? Because in modern warfare, it's not always about large-scale destruction. Sometimes, it's about targeting the few systems that everything else depends on. And when those systems are disrupted, the effects spread quickly. Economic pressure, political instability, regional uncertainty, and suddenly, this is no longer just a military conflict. It becomes economic, global, because the relationship between the Gulf states and the global economy, especially the United States, runs deep. Oil revenues, investment flows, financial markets are all connected. And when one part of that system is under pressure, the effects don't stay contained. They ripple outward. So the real strategy here is not about defeating the United States directly, but about increasing the cost of conflict, spreading pressure across multiple fronts, and turning time itself into a weapon. Because history has shown something. Even the most powerful nations struggle in wars that don't have clear endings, wars that stretch on, that evolve, that refuse to follow familiar rules. So maybe the real question isn't who is stronger, but this: can a superpower sustain a conflict that targets not just its military, but the systems that support its power? Or does it slowly become something else? Longer, more expensive, more uncertain. And in that kind of war, what does winning even mean? But there's something even more uncomfortable. This was never a war the United States was fully prepared for. Because this isn't Iraq, it isn't Libya, it isn't Venezuela. Those conflicts followed a different pattern. Short operations, weaker states, limited resistance. Iran is not built the same way. It has deeper regional networks, missile capabilities, and a strategy designed specifically for long-term confrontation. So comparing Iran to past interventions may have been a fundamental mistake. This all raises a difficult question. Was this a war that should have been avoided altogether? Because even inside the United States, there are millions of voices questioning whether there was an immediate threat at all. And if a conflict begins without clear necessity and evolves into something prolonged, history suggests the consequences rarely stay contained. They expand, economically, politically, globally. And over time, they don't just change outcomes. They shift power. They reshape alliances. They redefine who leads. So this isn't just about one war, but about something bigger, a turning point, where the balance of global power quietly begins to change.